Hey, welcome to channel. In this video, I'm going to talk about what if Naruto has silver dust and got into Harem? And please make sure to check out author of this fanfic named Climbing Silver by Grandlays. Let's get started. Minato had been through many painful and terrifying situations. He'd been stabbed, burned, scalded, and nearly crushed while washing a giant toad with a rag. He'd faced down entire squadrons of enemy shinobi, had fireballs and boulders as large as the Hokage Tower launched at him, and had accidentally walked into the ladies' side of the onsen near his home. That last one wasn't so bad, since apparently most of the ladies didn't mind him coming in, for some odd reason. Whenever his sensei accidentally did the same thing, the bruises he'd left with had stayed for nearly a week. Everything he'd experienced, however, paled in comparison to the day of Kushina's childbirth. The screams, the wails, the feeling of, oh my god, I'm a dad, I'm going to be a dad, holy crap, holy. Minato, I swear if you don't get your shit together right now, his beautiful and terrifying girlfriend snarled, squeezing his hand even tighter. Was that a crack he heard? I don't care if you have missions to run, you're changing the kids' diapers. Every fucking day. Did he mention that Kushina had a really nasty mouth while delivering? Deep breaths, you need to take deep breaths, Bawako-san said gently, and Minato instinctively found himself following the instructions as well. The Sandame's wife shot him a dirty look that contrasted greatly with her bedside manner. Not you, idiot. You focus on containing the seal. Minato almost whimpered. Bawako-sama seemed to make it a point in her life to make Minato's worse after she'd seen the results of the pregnancy test for Kushina. Now, everything that went wrong in her eyes was because of him. Absolutely unfair. Granted, it was his fault for impregnating his girlfriend, and more importantly, taking the village's Jinchuriki off the active duty roster for 9 whole months during wartime. But it was an accident. He'd gone over to Kushina's house for dinner, and she produced a bottle of horrifyingly strong alcohol from her pantry. The next few hours were a little murky, but he'd assumed that they'd had unprotected sex somewhere along the way. Their positions when they woke up next morning, as well as the general state of the bed sheets, only confirmed his suspicions when they had to literally untangle themselves from each other. The results of their night together made themselves known once Kushina started throwing up in the mornings. Jiraiya-sensei was the one who had sent her the sake that he'd later found out was from one of his detours on a mission. Seriously, the man should have been known for his legendary ability to multitask, rather than his battle presence. Jiraiya-sensei would somehow always have time to mess around at an onsen or a brothel while still completing the objective. It was just absurd. How did he do that? Even more, why would he even get sake on a detour to send to Kushina? Anyway, and he was not jealous that sensei had disregarded to send him a present as well. It just wasn't like him. Those actions spoke of a plan of sorts. There was a conspiracy here. He just had to find it. Furrowing his brow, Minato concentrated. He sent sake to Kushina, who he knows only drinks when she has good friends over since she refused to drink with him, he thought, and the only good friend that has time to visit from her pool is me. And I'm very sure that he knows that sake makes Jinchuriki horny. Oh hell. He stiffened, eyes wide. Was that what sensei was aiming for? He wanted to get his student laid? A groan rose up in his chest from the realization that he might have been played. But Bawako-san narrowed her eyes at his wandering focus, and he snapped back to reality and returned to maintaining the seal. There would be time to feel self-pity later, as well as to interrogate his sensei. Meanwhile, Kushina was busy trying to convince herself that no matter how much this shit hurt, she was not discovering the sixth circle of hell. She had very capable nurses that knew what they were doing, and her stupid, wonderful boyfriend was here to contain her tenant. It would be a smooth, easy delivery. Easy. Keep pushing, Kushina. You're almost there. She resisted the urge to scream right then, from pain or from victory at being so close she didn't really know. The seal was burning like hell, and Kushina had never hated the stupid fox more than in this moment. The contractions were painful enough, but the QB just had to make things worse. She took a quick peek at Minato, and would have laughed if it didn't hurt so much. He was pale and sweating more than an akimichi in the summer heat. Namake's Minato, the yellow flash, who regularly stared down enemy teams without flinching, looked like he was literally about to pass out from the stress of the delivery. Another contraction, stronger than the rest, nearly made her heave, and Bawako started barking out orders to the other midwives. Something unintelligible, because right then all Kushina really could think about was the fact that, oh God, the seal, it's weakening. Her stomach felt like it was on fire, and her whole body began flaming up with the telltale signs of demonic chakra. Minato somehow pulled through for her in his panicked state, and the inky lines that had started to spread over her body receded back to the seal on top of her womb, and she found that she could breathe again. Maybe, she thought a little guiltily, I'll be a bit nicer to him once this is all over. He's gone through enough shit for these past months. Not as much as me, but still. She still didn't know what she was thinking, keeping the baby. Logically, the best thing to do was to abort it. It was wartime. She was needed to stomp on all the enemy forces, but she couldn't deprive this baby, her baby, of this chance to live. She'd secretly been excited when the test had come out positive, unlike her boyfriend, who had passed out from the shock, because if there was one thing that she'd wanted to be other than the first female Hokage, it was a mother. She had deeply rooted values, and they told her that it was wrong to murder something that hadn't had a chance to experience anything because it was the logical thing to do. And she wanted it too. She'd pissed off a lot of the council for her, Minato's, irresponsible actions, and it had taken her best friends, Mikoto and Tsum, to convince them not to immediately abort it. Right then, she vowed to work twice as hard to end the war for her child's sake, and for everyone else as well. It was with a lot of guilt that she realized that she and Minato had a lot of time to make up for being absent on the war front, which meant that her child wouldn't have his parents around for some time. Poor baby. Hopefully she could get Bawako-san to take care of her baby until she could be back. First things first, though, was getting this kid out. It had been in her for much too long, and she had started having dreams of those glorious days past where she didn't have constantly swollen ankles and an enlarged belly. Push, Kushina. You're doing just fine. We're almost there. She nearly growled with the effort she put into straining her muscles. Didn't Bawako say that same thing 5 minutes ago? She was a liar, and Kushina was so going to get her back later for getting her hopes up early. Except she could really feel it this time. The baby was coming. Minato, mouth agape, watched in morbid fascination as his crowning baby was pulled out and swathed in blankets by Bawako-san. Gods, how in the world did his girlfriend stretch that much? It didn't look like a baby. It was more like a red, wrinkly raisin. As if insulted by his observation, the raisin started crying and wailing up a storm, while Bawako-san began running tests with her crew. Range chakra, is that norm? Will be the special Uzumaki Chuck. Was something wrong? Judging from the confused faces of the midwives, there was something off about his boy's chakra. But the baby was out. He was here. And when Bawako returned with the bundle, Minato reached for his beautiful baby boy with trembling hands and was promptly slapped away by an irate Bawako-san. Mother gets to see the child first. You miserable wretch. Get the seal stabilized already. He actually did whimper this time. Bawako-san was always going to think of him as a hormonal teen who thought with his dick, wasn't she? Inwardly cursing Jiraiya-sensei, he set to work on fixing the seal. My genin would be laughing at me if they saw this, he thought glumly. Kushina was busy panting the stars out of her vision and trying to see her baby at the same time. While one part of her mind screamed victory, the other screamed bloody hell, and she could feel the fox's chakra seeping through her system again as the seal started unraveling. A large explosion of noise shook the room, and everyone in the room tensed. As dust fell from the rafters above, Minato's gaze turned steely, and he started kneading chakra. The room shook again, the reinforced doors bending and twisting into a shape that was oddly familiar, actually. What an interesting spiral. One last explosion threw the doors open, seal lines sputtering out, and Minato readied himself, thoroughly forgetting about the seal on his girlfriend. He was ready to jump into action and kill whoever dared to harm his newborn son and his girlfriend. Palming a Hiraition kunai and extending his senses, he peered through the gaping doors to catch a glimpse of his target and froze. A large mane of white hair jauntily stepped through the wreckage. Hey Gaki, how did the childbirth go? Jiraiya-sensei was so dead. Minato could feel it. This was a certainty, a fact of the universe that could not be challenged. He was dead. An unearthly screech sounded throughout the room, and Jiraiya turned as white as his hair as he registered his favorite student, crouched near the bed with a pale face and a kunai, Bawako Obasan, who looked about ready to murder him with that scalpel, and Kushina-chan, with her legs spread open and gaping from childbirth, demonic chakra bubbling from her seal, and her long red hair flying like tails. He never figured out how she did that. He could only lengthen and strengthen his own hair, not make it fly around like it was a being possessed. Maybe a trick with the Kyuubi's chakra? Wrong time for that right now, he thought to himself. I'm sure Minato can handle the resealing just fine by himself, and vanished from his sensei's home in a shunshin. Or he would have, if Buwako, with all the foresight and knowledge of someone who'd known him nearly all his life, hadn't moved to grab his ear before he could make the hand seals. Minato grabbed his baby boy from her unoccupied arm and reluctantly handed him off to a terrified nurse to stabilize the seal. Jiraiya-sensei was dragged out of the remains of the doors to the private, sealed-off room of the Hokage's residence with shouts trailing behind him. Idiot boy using Rasengan to break into a sealed OFF room that has a lady giving birth, you inconsiderate slob like student like sensei, I swear to Kami. Sensei would be okay. Hopefully. Minato fed chakra to Kushina's stomach to restabilize the seal again, and watched as his exhausted girlfriend received her newborn and cradled him in her arms. Planting a kiss on his tiny forehead, she whispered words that only she, the baby, and Minato could hear. You'll be our winning strategy in this war, okay? We'll be thinking of you as we fight, and our will of fire will shine so brightly that no one will be able to beat us, Tebane. As the parents were cooing over their new baby, one of the midwives, Taji, smiled at them and began writing up a birth certificate. Parents, Namikaze Minato, 19, and Uzumaki Kushina, 19. Born, December 2nd, at the Hokage's residence, Kanahagakure. She looked up. Have you decided on a name for the child? Minato stopped his adoration for just a moment to think and give his answer. Name, Namikaze Sakusen. When Sakusen opened his eyes, he found himself in the clearing again. Damn, how did he keep ending up here? Not that he was complaining, but he was just curious, in that way that young children usually are. It was large, barren area surrounded by tall, looming trees. Moonlight from the full moon gleamed off of the snow covering the ground and dusting the trees. Sakusen could barely remember the last time snow had come in the land of fire. This was certainly not his home, that was for sure. And like last time, and the time before that, and that as well, he heard the howls pierce through the silence of the night. From the dark shadows of the trees, a pack of wolves burst through the clearing. They were on the hunt, and ran so quickly and gracefully that it looked as if they were flying across the snow, feet barely touching the ground. And when he turned to chase after the pack, he was flying along with them, the cool breeze flowing across his face as he joined them in their midnight hunt. Sakusen had never felt so elated and free. Of course, that was where he had to wake up. Opening his eyes blearily, Sakusen rubbed the sleep out of them. It was the good dream too, he groaned, as the last vestiges of that wonderful soaring feeling slipped away. Every time after waking up, he felt like that time Gigi had taken him to the dentist and the man had put a lead blanket over him. It was hard to get up with it on, especially since it was larger than he was. That was what getting up felt like after dreaming. In front of his bathroom mirror, on top of a stool, he was too short to reach the top alone, and Asuma teased him relentlessly about it. The 3-year-old Namikaze Sakusen looked at his reflection. Sharp eyes with bright violet irises stared back on a small, round face framed by messy yellow hair. On each of his cheeks were 3 lines that resembled adorable little whiskers, as Rin called them. In a way, they reminded him of the wolves in his dreams. He ran a hand through his hair, combing his long spikes back, while trying to remember everything from his run with the pack. He'd had that dream regularly around this time of the month, when there was a full moon when he looked out of his window. It was like that time a stray cat had kept following him after sharing his food with it, always coming back eventually for more. His hand got caught in his tangled locks, and he tried his best to set his hair straight. Sakusen frowned, face twisting into a cute pout. The spikes went everywhere, and there was no use trying to tame them. Bawako-bachan even claimed that it had to be a new Kekii Genkai, since it was just impossible that hair was like that naturally. According to her, Minato, his Tusan, had the same-ish hairstyle as well. Of the few pictures he'd seen of his father, she was right. But the man's spikes were less floppy. He giggled thinking of Kakashi's hairstyle. Every time he had a chance to run his fingers through the tufts, he could feel the static electricity crackling off his hands. Maybe because he had a natural lightning release affinity? Kakashi was weird and moody. Hopefully Sakusen wasn't a lightning user either. He made sure to check for sparks in his hair every morning. He'd hate to have hair that crazy. His own was bad enough. Only Tusan's team made it home sometimes after missions. His favorite was Rin, since she always took him out to buy taiyaki when she was free. Tusan never came home with them, since the Yellow Flash was an important asset on the battlefield. So was Ka-san, for other reasons. He got the fact that teleporting made you hard to kill and made it easy to kill others, but Ka-san seemed to be high up for no reason. Not saying that he thought she was bad, of course, but there was literally nothing he knew about her abilities. Then again, the record offices wouldn't let him see any information on her skills for some odd reason, so he didn't really have a good idea of what she could do. He understood the reasons for them not being able to come home. It was hard, but he did get it. It was like the first lesson he'd been taught when he first learned to play shogi with Gigi. Taking away important pieces would leave you vulnerable, and you would lose. Losing was bad, so it made sense that they would be out on the front. He didn't mind being less of a priority in his parents' minds as much as one thought he would be, but he still missed them a lot. The last memory he could recall of them was Ka-san's long, beautiful red hair and Tusan's laugh and vibrant smile. He didn't remember how they acted, so he only had his grandparents' words to go by. Bawako-bachan was dead set on him not taking up his father's unruly teenage habits, saying that he was irresponsible and a blockhead. Whatever those meant. Bachan said that about his father a lot, for some reason. He got the impression that Tusan was not on the list of things that Oba-san liked. Did he offend her in some way? He wondered. Far away, on the border of the land of fire, Namikaze Minato sneezed. The chill that was running down his back right now was familiar, in the way that dredged up unpleasant memories. What was that? The IWA squadron he'd been attempting to hide from had heard, and he sighed. Oh well. Downstairs, the Sandaime Hokage was sipping his coffee. Bawako was already over at the hospital managing the morning shift. He should probably do the same soon at his own office, or else the Chunin on duty there would be like lost little lambs. He snorted. Wartime meant quicker promotions, which often translated to fresh young recruits that were absolutely not ready to be kicked into an office with an actual filing system that none of them ever learned how to use at all. That was neither good for him nor them, or the war effort. He turned to take his pipe, but found it already gone. That was quick. His grandson had learned how to muffle his footsteps with chakra, so he'd missed the actual moment of the theft. Not that it meant anything to the Sandaime, of course. The boy was always radiating chakra that could easily be picked up from anywhere within his range when he entered sensing state. Up close like this, it was like he was shining a torch at his Gigi's face. Chuckling, Hiruzen spoke in a congratulatory tone. You've gotten much faster than last time. I almost didn't catch you. Almost. A muffled noise of disappointment came from behind the kitchen countertop, and Sakusen crawled out from underneath clutching the pipe in his hand. They had made it a game of sorts for Sakusen to sneak around and take stuff without his noticing. Already, he was living up to his namesake. The boy had waited until the Sandaime's head was tipping back with the motion of drinking from his cup to scramble under the table and snatch the pipe. He'd give him that one. It was a good try. That chakra presence was just going to be a damning factor in his stealth training, though. Hiruzen's eyes narrowed, cup halfway to his lips. Now that he thought about it, for a moment, he'd felt Sakusen's chakra dull very slightly, barely enough to be noticeable. Suppressing was a skill that normally had to be taught. If Sakusen had felt a need to dampen his signature, it was probably because he'd compared his own signature to other ninja in the village and felt the difference in size. It wasn't a perfect suppression, not by a long shot. He quirked his lips slightly. If the boy could ever manage even an 80% suppression within his lifetime, that would be quite the accomplishment in itself. But there was no mistaking the fact that the signature was dampened down. The boy was probably a censor, he concluded with an air of finality. You didn't spend decades surviving this long as a ninja and not learn anything. There was a reason he was called the professor. He would probably assign someone to check for certain later. I can never win at this, Sakusen pouted, returning the pipe to the table and brushing off the dust from his pants. The boy was so much like his parents. There was Minato in that sharp eye shape, hair, and calm analytical ability, but his violet irises and occasional loud outburst were all Kushina. Nonsense. You're only 3, after all. You've done very well for your age. Understatement of the year, Hiruzen thought dryly. The fact that an Uzumaki managed even a partial suppression with no formal training is a complete miracle. Sakusen puffed up a little hearing that. He would have to beat that growing attitude out of him. Arrogance was a big problem in the field, unless you could back it up. And Hiruzen was not taking any chances of losing his boy because he overestimated his own abilities. Emma could probably do it within one training session. It had certainly worked with Jiraiya. Anyway, mostly. Can you take me to the weapons shop today? Or teach me a cool new jutsu? I've been good, right? You promised. Hiruzen nearly winced, choking on his freshly smoking pipe. He had promised to take Sakusen to the weapons shop later, hadn't he? He was a terrible person for forgetting his promises so easily, especially to his grandson. Not that it was completely his fault, of course. The Hokage was on the top of the list of busiest people during wartime, and he knew that battle strategies and meetings awaited him at the Hokage Tower. He barely had time to even care for the boy. A bored Uzumaki proved to be a menace in an office stacked with papers, which meant that Sakusen was usually left to care for himself at home. He felt guilty for leaving the boy alone when even his parents were gone. There was no mistaking that sparkle in Sakusen's eyes whenever he looked at Hiruzen. To Sakusen, his Gigi was something greater than man, the best of ninja, able to do anything and everything. Hiruzen hated to have to destroy that image of himself by not being able to just be there for him, like he had done with Asuma and Akane. His current relationship with his sons was rocky, at best, but not being able to stick around was something that couldn't be helped. He had priorities as the Hokage, and the village needed him more than his sons and his adoptive grandson did, as much as it pained him to admit it. Hopefully, Sakusen would understand. Shadow clones weren't an option either. They wouldn't last long enough for the whole day to watch over the boy. Plus, he'd get a splitting migraine if he tried. And Buwako would be on his case. And who would complete Konoha's paperwork then? Shikaku? Most certainly not. Other people had secret stashes of alcohol or munchies in their drawers. Shikako had a secret stash of pillows. Sakusen saw the apologetic look forming on his Gigi's face and quickly interrupted. Actually, it's fine, Gigi. I think I can get it myself. Can I go down to the training grounds? He took back his previous thought. He did not deserve this wonderful child's understanding. He was terrible. Terrible. Hiruzen resolved later to clear some time to take Sakusen to that weapons shop and teach him some basic jutsu. That is fine. Just remember to be careful, he sighed, the wrinkles on his face becoming more pronounced. Hiruzen could trust Sakusen to look after himself. He was more mature than any he'd seen at that age, and besides, he'd assigned someone to tail him. That didn't mean he wasn't allowed to worry. Although no one else other than those present at the delivery was supposed to know about the birth of another Uzumaki, you could never be too cautious. They were prime targets for sticking bijou inside. Not to mention that their skill in sealing was unparalleled. Kumo would be halfway down their mountain already if this information had been leaked. Sticky-fingered bastards. Now, who would be good with kids and teaching from his active roster? The third training ground was Sakusen's favorite place to be at. Not only did it have trees to climb up on and water to swim in, the clearing with the 3 stumps resembled the clearing from his dream. He sat down on top of a stump, opening a pilfered scroll from Gigi's library. Hopefully he wouldn't mind too much, and began reading. Sakusen enjoyed reading the most, especially from his grandfather's library. There were layers and layers of scrolls detailing the theory of chakra, hand seals, and jutsu that would make the research and development department drool. Not that he understood everything in there, but it was still interesting to read, and he'd learned a lot by poring over all the scrolls. Hand seals, for instance. They required a lot of dexterity, especially for performing jutsu quickly. Little kid muscles did not like the workout he gave his fingers at all, but they weren't hard to form, as he discovered. because the flow of chakra naturally attracted the tenketsu on his hands and fingers together. Sort of like sticking magnets together, you just had to guide the magnets correctly to each other. The different positions altered the flow of chakra, making it easier to perform jutsu of different natures. Some people mastered altering their flow to such an extent that jutsu required less hand seals or none at all to perform. That wasn't all, though. The first time he tried a fire-release Sarutobi hidden technique, the results had been spectacularly explosive, making him black out in the process. He'd woken up to a burning training ground and had run home in a panic with soot all over him. Apparently, fire release was not his forte, and hidden techniques had to be taught from one to another, so that may have been another reason why he'd failed. Sakusen tried very hard to ignore the glaring fact that it would take years just to gain enough control to use that kick-ass fire dragon jutsu, especially for him. Control didn't seem to be his strong suit, but he never really tried before. Hand seals were only one part of jutsu. The other half was chakra control, which he was trying to improve right now with something called the tree walking exercise. It's not hard to understand, at least. At least not as hard as the jutsu on that big scroll that he'd found in Gigi's office. The stuff on there was pure insanity. At least some of it. He'd memorized the stuff he could understand. He was good with stuff like that. Tree walking was basically using chakra to stick to the tree, or some other surface. But Konoha had a bunch of trees, so he'd start there. It couldn't be that hard, he reasoned, because nearly everyone learned how to do this. He could do it too. Making the ram seal, he channeled his chakra and placed his foot on the tree. Unbeknownst to him, a pair of spinning red eyes watched his progress. Uchiha Shursui looked on with interest at the small boy now attempting to start tree walking. He let out a small chuckle. The kid was cute, trying to learn a skill like that already before entering the academy. He shifted his legs to keep the blood flowing through them, nearly falling from the branch he was camping out on. Sandaime-sama had assigned him to guard the kid, which he didn't know how to feel about. On one hand, the Hokage himself had requested him to take care of the boy. On the other, it was basically a babysitting mission. Should he be honored or insulted? Shursui shrugged. He was getting paid, at least, and that new tanto that Nikoba had on display was looking fine as hell. The only warning he had as to what happened next was a blinding flare of bright purple chakra coming from the kid's leg. A large crackling sound ripped through the clearing, and Shursui blanched as the tree that the kid was trying to climb literally toppled over. He started panicking. What was the kid doing? How was he destroying trees like that? Was he dead? Oh dear God. Did the tree fall on him? Why were there no screams? He definitely would have screamed if his foot had crumpled a tree like that. Sakusen was not dead nor screaming. He was busy trying to blink out the stars from his vision. Dazedly, he remembered some kind of law that he'd found in the library. Every action has an equal reaction? Or something. He really couldn't remember at the moment. Although he really did wish that he'd used less chakra, because the first step had sent him rocketing back to the other side. His foot was burning from shoving all that chakra out at once. That was a bad idea. Well, at least he knew he had to use less of it now. Shursui was still gawking at the tree. The kid had blown himself clear across to the other side of the field with his feet, which must have hurt like hell. Hopefully he was okay, but Shursui was starting to have serious doubts about letting the boy train by himself. Dang, that kid had a crap ton of chakra, if what he'd seen before the explosion had indicated. Where did it all come from? The kid was a pint-sized brat who should not be able to hold that much. There was no way he was letting the kid train by himself after seeing that. The Hokage would probably not be happy with him if he dragged a comatose child into the hospital. Didn't the Hokage's wife work there too? Well, then he would be double fucked. He was interfering. Of course, he had orders from Hokage-sama to watch Sakusen, which implied just observing from a distance, but he hadn't said anything about not participating in his training. Maybe the Hokage wanted him to read between the lines? That was probably it. He decided with a nod and flickered down in a shunshin. Sakusen was busy checking his foot and his head for damage after hobbling over to the stump. Grumbling, he was wrapping his foot up when he felt the familiar tingle of chakra whoosh behind him. Normally, he needed to spin his chakra a certain way to feel other presences. He discovered that on accident while at home trying to activate his chakra coils. so it was probably a jutsu that someone was using behind him. So he did what anyone else would have done and springboard off his stump to face his attacker. Well, that was the plan. But he forgot about his sore foot and instead face-planted the ground. Shursui watched, surprised, as the boy did an amusing swan dive straight into the grass. So he was a censor. No way would a pre-academy student know that he'd landed otherwise. Hokage-sama would be happy to hear his suspicions confirmed. "Who are you?" the blonde-haired boy asked, rolling over to spit dirt out of his mouth with a suspicious glare. Straight and to the point. He liked this kid. Shursui smiled. "I'm Uchiha Shursui. You look like you're having trouble with that control exercise. You need to put way less chakra into it." Sakusen blinked. That was not what he had expected, of all things. This curly-haired boy that had suddenly appeared out of nowhere. How did he do that? There was definitely nothing behind him when he'd sat down. Was suddenly proffering help? He wasn't dumb enough to refuse heavily needed guidance, but this boy didn't seem that much older than him. Obviously, the natural thing to do was to voice his doubts. "Can you do it? You don't look much older than me." "How old are you?" The Uchiha deflated a little. He got enough crap from the older shinobi for being a 6-year-old genin. Now someone younger than him was questioning his rank too. Didn't these guys see the headband? He wanted a neon strap for it now, and maybe flashing lights to go around the plate. "Actually, I'm a genin. I'm taking the Chunin exams next year too, and I'm 6. Sakusen wowed. That was actually pretty impressive, from what he knew. "Genin? At 6? I thought you stayed in the academy for 4 years. Did you enter when you were 2? Or maybe you skipped years?" Ooh, the boy was sharp too. Sort of like Itachi, but with more spunk. "That's right. I entered at 5 years old and graduated at 6 some time ago. I only spent a year there because I mastered all the chakra exercises and knowledge tests early on." He put extra emphasis on the early on. "What's your name?" Oh yeah, Bawako Bachan had told him it was polite to introduce himself to people he didn't know. "I'm Sakusen. Can you please help me with this chakra control exercise?" He made sure to turn on his pleading puppy eye face. From experience, it had usually gotten him what he wanted. Taking a glance at the scroll, Shursui frowned. It was an older scroll, but still had all the basics and essentials. There was absolutely no reason for Sakusen to exude that much chakra for his first attempt. Sakusen might not have been as bright as he thought. He cleared his throat. "Watch me. I don't blast out chakra like you first did. I control the amount that comes out and I keep it there. That's why it's called control." Shursui demonstrated on the nearest tree by making a half ram and walking straight up it. Looking back down at the blonde mop of hair, Sakusen's eyes were wide. "That's pretty cool. I'm gonna try to." "Watch. How cute." He was sort of like Itachi, with that strange mature aura they both carried around and that sharp mind. Shursui was going to arrange for them to meet sometime. He had a feeling they would get along well. Time to switch shifts with the next babysitter. He'd come back at lunch to give some pointers. There was no way this kid would be able to have it down by then. Tree walking was hard. By lunchtime, there were bits of tree bark debris scattered everywhere on the ground. Sakusen was panting, but he'd gotten most of the concept down. The idea was to pad the feet with a certain amount of chakra to stick like a magnet, as his scroll explained it. Too little, and the magnet wouldn't be strong enough to hold. Too much chakra, and you got pushed away. Or in Sakusen's case, blown away. The problem was, he understood the concept perfectly. Shursui thought he was stupid. He could tell, but he actually got everything. But every time he stepped up and channeled chakra like that, it built up like a blocked pipe, and he could barely control what came out. There was something he was doing wrong. He had lots of chakra, but this was crazy. There should be a way to slow it down. There was always a way. Going back over everything again with a frown, Sakusen thought about it again and again. Well, chakra flow was controlled with hand seals too, right? What if he changed the hand seal? Did it have to be the ram seal? Why not others? Shursui had done half ram, so it would make sense that different ninja use different seals, right? Shursui was back up in the tree now, watching on his stomach, arms and legs hanging down. There was literally no hope for the kid. He had little to no experience with working with chakra, so he would probably have to wait until he became genin, or at the very least, was taught better by his instructors. Then the kid did something that made his jaw drop even more than when he'd blown up the tree. Sakusen was cycling through the different hand seals, experimenting. Tiger and dog felt worse than Ram did, and it gravitated towards his stomach, and he'd had to take a second or two to shove the chakra back into his coils. Snake was much better, but still, he could do better than that. Tenketsu could line up in literally a million different positions, and he knew there were other seals than the basic 12. Playing around with his hand positions, he fiddled with his fingers, and then, oh, there we go. It was nothing special, just literally placing the palms of his hands together, like a clap. But in this position, chakra ran freely through his body without interruptions, without making pent-up energy. He could literally feel the flow. It was sort of like the pre-sensing state mode. From there, it was easy to concentrate and skim some chakra off the cycle to guide to his feet. Switching back to Ram on an impulse, he felt with absolute clarity the chakra he'd sent to his feet being sucked to the bottom of his sandals. He couldn't absorb it, but he could attract it. This was the ratio he discovered a while back, but could never get. Holding his breath, he put his foot to the trunk, and he stuck. The whoop of joy shocked Shursui out of his daze. He took back every negative thing he'd thought about Sakusen's intelligence. The boy was a genius. No doubt now. What Sakusen did was gain a complete understanding of hand seals and chakra flow that even Jounin didn't have, and use that to change the rules around to his advantage. Persevering with one method was one thing, but understanding the method and changing it? That was working smarter, not harder. Words could not describe how shocked he still was at seeing a 3-year-old do that. And he was used to seeing the usual Uchiha prodigy do stuff that no one had seen before. Guiltily, Shursui reevaluated his thought process. Had he been judging the boy based on what Uchiha Genin typically accomplished? That was a little unfair of him. Sometimes, that potential needed to be brought out. And he knew exactly the kind of friend Sakusen would need to bring his out. Well, it's still within mission parameters. And besides, this is good training for when I need to make judgment calls in the future. Ow, ow, Sakusen muttered as he trudged toward the food stands. While he had gotten the idea, it took a while to learn how to naturally alter the flow to be able to unstick from the tree to take the next step. He'd fallen about 10 feet up trying to perfect his technique. The fall had left him with some bruises, but luckily it wasn't anything serious. There was a strange pile of leaves that had broken most of his descent that he didn't think was there before, but who was he to argue? Besides, if he had come home hurt more badly, Bawako-bachan would give him a terrible scolding, and then yell at Gigi for letting him train alone. And then he would have to go back to the office. Or worse, the hospital. Sakusen didn't like that place. It smelled of disinfectant, and the nurses wouldn't let him run around in the hallways. A growl came from his stomach. He was starving, and he wanted food. Now, what should he get? There was always so much to choose from in the market district. They had food stands with yakitori and takoyaki, and those delicious taiyaki that the tea house had. Sakusen nearly drooled thinking about all the food he could buy. Ah crap. He'd left his wallet at his house, hadn't he? Of course I would forget my money, he thought a little crossly. Now he would have to run back to the Hokage's residence to get his wallet, and that was nearly halfway across the village. And he was hungry. He felt tempted to let out a despondent wail, but checked himself. He was a big boy now, and big boys didn't cry. But big boys didn't forget their money either, he reminded himself. Now what was he going to do? Forgot to bring money? He remembered that voice. Sakusen looked up to see Shursui perched like a bird on top of one of the stands, waving with a grin on his face. Great. Now someone had seen him mess up. I did. I'll have to run back to get it. Hey, can you teach me that jutsu you used? You know, that cool one where you moved really fast? Sorry, Saka-chan, Shursui said back. That was an adorable pout that Sakusen had. He'd be sure to keep using that nickname. The Shunshin isn't as easily taught as the tree walking. You'll need more than a couple of hours to get it down. How about you come over to our district? I know someone that makes really great food. Sakusen shifted, uncomfortably. Is that okay? It feels a little rude to do that. He'd never really gotten invites to other friends' houses. He actually didn't have very many other friends, other than Obito, Kakashi, and Rin, because they were the ones who came over to visit the most. He did know, however, that normally you sent word to someone before meeting them. That was what Gigi did when he scheduled appointments with other people. This couldn't be that different, right? Nonsense, Shursui snorted. The kid just probably wasn't used to other people, considering the fact that Hokage-sama assigned guards to tail him around. That kind of attention tended to scare away the other children's parents and subsequently, their kids. She'd be happy to have you around. The person I'm taking you to knows your mom, too, I think. That got his attention. Really? Who? Who is it? The Uchiha boy smiled. Uchiha Mikoto. She's my clan head's wife. You'll love her. The Uchiha district wasn't a very bad place to be in. There were mostly civilians left over, with the occasional stern-faced ninja on patrol now that the war had occupied most of the upper ranks' time. Shursui guided Sakusen through the confusing mishmash of identical, traditional houses, finally stopping at one compound that was larger than the others. By now, Sakusen was a little nervous. He just remembered Gigi's warning to not follow strange people around. But Shursui wasn't strange, right? Any doubts he had vanished when Shursui knocked on the door of the main compound, and a beautiful, raven-haired woman answered. Her eyes, which shone like dark obsidian, lit up at the sight of the blonde-haired boy, and a gentle smile formed on her face. "Ah, hello. You must be Sakusen," she exclaimed happily, ushering in both Sakusen and Shursui, who looked just a tad bit miffed at being ignored. The woman led them to a living room, her glittering hair flowing behind her. "I've heard so much about you from Sandame-sama. You've been training hard, right? I tried to set some time aside for you and Itachi to meet up and spend some time together, since you don't seem to interact too much with others, but all village jounin are busy, and coming home to take care of little Itachi and Fugaku takes up enough time as is. Would you like some tea?" Sakusen accepted politely, listening as the woman rambled. "Excuse me, I heard you knew my mother?" Mikoto stopped talking and smiled again. He didn't waste any time fooling around. How so like Kushina? She missed her. That's right. We've been friends since our academy days. Do you remember meeting her? He shook his head. Only bits and pieces. Like her hair. And I remember Tusan's smile. But that's it. The woman laughed. Her hair was always one of the more memorable things about her, along with her attitude and her appetite. She grinned fondly as she recalled her academy days. Kushina was a boisterous girl back in the academy. On her first day there, she was being teased by other kids for her hair color and for being a foreigner. She beat everyone up so badly, they named her the red, hot-blooded habanero. Shursui chose this moment to speak up, setting down his half-empty teacup. "Pardon me for asking, Mikoto-san, but who are his parents?" "My dad is Namikaze Minato, and my mom is Uzumaki Kushina." I didn't know she was a foreigner. This was the first time he'd heard about the foreigner part. He missed Shursui perk up at the mention of his dad's name. Yes, she came from Yuzushiogakure when she was a child. Her home was destroyed during the Second Shinobi War, though. Here Mikoto's face took on a sad expression, which made Sakusen want to go over and hug her. That was probably levels of inappropriate, though, seeing how she was a clan head's wife. Remember politics. Don't offend big clan members. Kushina always talked about going back to honor her family members, but could never get the courage to see what remained of her homeland. She started saying that she had a new family here in Konoha, and that past memories were best left undisturbed. "I can't imagine what it would be like to learn that your home was destroyed," remarked Shursui with a small frown. His teacup was empty now. He really enjoyed his tea. It must have been hard for her. "Maybe you can go later when you're older for your ka-san, Sakusen." Sakusen nodded. "Maybe. I think I would like that." The door to the house opened, and a quiet Tadaima came from the hallway. "Okiri, Itachi, bring the groceries to the kitchen, please," said Mikoto, hurrying to the dining table. Sakusen was reminded of his hunger, which had lessened somewhat, but still gnawed away at his stomach. Footsteps sounded in the hallway, accompanied by the sound of crinkling plastic bags, and a young boy about Sakusen's age emerged, carrying an armful of groceries. He had pronounced tear troughs stretching down his face, with long black hair and onyx eyes. He didn't look surprised to see Shursui and Sakusen, but his eyes still looked curiously at the blonde Namikaze. "This is Sakusen, Itachi." "Sakusen, this is my son, Itachi." Would you all like to wait and talk outside until the food is done? Asked Mikoto, busy transporting the contents of the bags to the stovetop. Of course, Ka-san, replied Itachi politely. Shursui led the way to a screen door that opened up to a patio and a fish pond. Once everyone was outside, the two youngest boys regarded each other with varying levels of interest. Eventually, Sakusen decided to make the first move and stuck his hand out to Itachi. Nice to meet ya. I'm Namike Sakusen. Itachi took the proffered hand with a small smile. Likewise. I'm Uchiha Itachi. Are you training to become a shinobi as well? That's right. Sakusen nodded proudly. I want to become a great ninja like my parents. The boy was nice, decided Itachi, and not wholesomely unpleasant or obnoxious to be around. He offered more of his friendship in the only way he knew how. Would you like to train together until Ka-san is finished cooking? Sakusen's smile threatened to split his face in half. Shursui smiled. His plan had worked. Itachi had a friend. Thank goodness they were both around the same level of weird for this to work. Only weird kids actually enjoyed training this young. Back at home, Sakusen talked animatedly with his grandparents over dinner. And then, Itachi showed me how to throw kunai and shuriken, and I finished the tree-walking exercise. But Itachi already knew how to do it. So the next time we meet, Shursui is going to teach us how to walk on water. It was so cool. And Bawako and Hiruzen shared a smile. The venerable Sandame was cheering inside. His plan had worked. Sakusen had a friend. He knew he could count on Shursui to notice the similarities that the socially awkward Uchiha boy and his isolated grandson allegedly shared, according to Mikoto. Maybe he wouldn't be so lonely while everyone was gone after all. I heard around the hospital that Sakusen's parents will be moving away from the front lines and toward the rear. Hiruzen? Interrupted Buwako, snapping Hiruzen out of his thoughts. How did you hear that around the hospital, of all places? Asked Hiruzen. The stuff that went around. You'd think that the hospital was for gossiping, not healing. All news somehow arrived there. Buwako waved her hand. Word gets around quick among hospital staff. Does this mean that Minato and Kushina will have an easier time coming home? Sakusen's eyes grew wide. He could see his parents again? Hiruzen quickly interjected before the boy could get too excited. They will be moving closer to the village and away from the heart of fighting, along with several squadrons. But that won't be for a couple of months. It will be a progressive movement, so not too soon. But you will be able to see them again. I promise. This week, I'll be sure to take you to the shop, too. Okay? That night, Sakusen went to sleep happier than he'd been in a while. And once again, he dreamed of the wolves bounding through the snowy clearing as the light of the moon shone down upon him. Again, Sakusen grimaced, settling back into his stance. His hands and muscles ached something awful, and he was sure that blisters would be forming soon. This was strike 99 for today's practice using the Bakken. Just one more to go. When Gigi had taken him to the weapons shop a couple of months earlier, as promised, he'd gotten the usual supply of kunai and shuriken that most ninja used while out in the field. While his grandfather was buying, he'd taken the chance to run through the aisles of assorted weapons. The rack of swords had caught his eye, and he'd reached out to grab one, knocking the whole supply over by mistake. So he was a little excited and hasty. But he was a kid, in a room with sharp, pointy objects. What else could one expect? Sakusen had immediately taken a shine to the various swords, and the shop owner and Gigi had found him enthusiastically hacking away sections of the wooden dummies with different blades. While Gigi had been mortified, the shop owner had laughed loudly and proclaimed that he saw talent in the boy. He'd been happy when he'd walked out of the store with a shiny new wakizashi at his side. He'd wanted a katana, of course, or maybe even an odachi, but the wakizashi and the tanto were the only ones that fit him at his current size. The tanto was too small, in his opinion, so he stuck with a 2-foot-long tempered wakizashi. Now, he was starting to slightly regret that decision. Haori-sensei glared at him, hands on her hips. It might have been scarier if she wasn't wheelchair-bound, but she made up for it by leaking killing intent into the air. Your form is too tight. Loosen up. Hands have to be lower. You're gonna die on the battlefield at this rate. Gritting his teeth, Sakusen did as he was told, shifting his stance until he was more comfortable and sliding his hands down the wooden sword. The woman was a demon. Worse than Enma, even, and Enma once threw him off of the tallest tree in the village to force him to learn how to swing. Gecko Haori was a prestigious swordswoman who was well known for her kenjutsu skills in Konoha. She had long, messy brown hair that she kept out of her face with her headband. Her flak jacket was unzipped, showing off her scandalously low tank top with mesh underneath. Despite her short stature, she was fiercely competent with a sword. Gigi had appointed her as his kenjutsu sensei after she'd sustained injuries on the field that would keep her in the village for the next couple of months. Despite her protests, the Sandaime had insisted that she would be a wonderful sensei if her son's success in the arts said anything. This just made her angry, and Sakusen knew that she was unleashing all her pent-up frustrations on him during their training sessions. She wouldn't let him even touch the wakizashi for the first few months, saying that training with form was much more important to start off with, which nearly killed Sakusen inside. He liked his sharp stuff, damn it. Raising the bakin over his head, he brought it down on the dummy with all the strength that his sore arm muscles could muster. The wood bounced off the shoulder of the straw doll like it was made of rubber, and Sakusen collapsed in exhaustion, moaning in pain. He was done for the day. He did not see the sadistic smirk that his instructor wore. Good effort, Gaki, but you're still too tight. Your strikes have no strength in them. How are you expecting to cut through someone if you can't even make a dent in a dummy? The only answer that she got was a snore. Haori's eyes twitched. Hate was never this whiny or pathetic when she trained him. What happened to the Uzumaki constitution that he was supposed to have? Weren't they supposed to be tough as nails? This kid had fallen asleep in the middle of a fucking lecture. Her face twisted up with a screech that sent the birds flying. What do you think you're doing? Snoozing when I'm giving you pointers on how to do better. And do you think you're done? You still have those laps to run. Swordsmen need to be quick. My mother runs faster than you, and she's dead. Get up and start moving. If there was a hell, then he'd stab himself with his own sword if he hadn't found it already. When he arrived at the lake, Sakusen dropped like a sack of rocks onto the pier with a sigh. Tough session? I told you that you shouldn't have gone jumping through the trees all day yesterday. You burned yourself out. Shut up, Itachi, Sakusen ground out to the smug-faced Uchiha. It wasn't that. I stayed up all night reading those Fuinjutsu scrolls that Gigi has hidden away. I got sleepy and Haori-sensei made me do 100 push-ups for not listening. He rubbed his sore biceps, wincing at the memory. Turning his head, he got a good look at Itachi, sitting on the deck a couple of feet away. They met nearly every single day after Shursui had introduced them together several months ago. Sakusen was now a fairly common sight in the Uchiha clan compound, and he knew most of the civilians there by heart. It didn't hurt that most of them were excellent bakers, and Sakusen could clear out the entire stock of taiyaki that the bakery had on a good day. Itachi could do the same thing to their dango supply. The lake stretched out to the very edge of the forest. It was their usual meeting place, and had been since Shursui had nearly drowned them here, trying to show them how to water walk. Itachi had gotten it first, like always. Sakusen required a little more time, but eventually had gotten it down to the point where modifying the hand seals wasn't necessary. For an Uzumaki, his control was phenomenal. Itachi held out a bento to Sakusen. Pa-san made your favorite. And yes, I've got your taiyaki. Sweet. Hold up first. Stripping out of his sweaty shirt and pants, Sakusen rolled off the pier's edge into the lake like a seal. The cold water was always a relief after Haori-sensei's training sessions. He sank to the very bottom, vigorously running his hands through his shoulder-length sticky hair. Gross. Itachi laughed, opening his own lunch. It was like a ritual for them now. Meet up, Sakusen jumps into the lake, and they eat and train. He was glad that they had been introduced to each other. Eyeing his food with a suspicious glance, sometimes Ka-san tried to sneak healthy foods into his onigiri, which should have been a crime. He started eating, only to stop after the first couple of bites. That was an awfully long time to remain underwater. Was Sakusen trying to use the air-filtering jutsu again? He knew this feeling. Oh crap, he remembered, and barely had enough time to sweep up the lunches and retreat before a burst of water showered the place he'd originally been sitting at. Glaring at the soggy, yellow-haired lump strewn out over the pier, Itachi briefly considered spiking his taiyaki with pepper the next time he brought lunch. What an ass. He could have warned me first. Sakusen blinked at the empty space where his friend used to occupy, then looked up with a sheepish grin. Sorry, hee. Used too much chakra. Sighing, Itachi set the lunches down again where they wouldn't get wet. Sakusen had insisted that it was just chakra he was sending out to make him blast out of the lake, but Itachi was sure there was some water release involved. Maybe that was his natural affinity? Either way, Itachi wouldn't be saving his friend's lunch the next time he did that. Sakusen dug into the food, frowning. He'd been trying to mess around with the principles of the water walking technique, which was similar in concept to the tree walking technique. Instead of a fixed amount of chakra, though, you had to emit a constant stream of chakra to support yourself above the surface of the water. If you made the stream too strong, as Sakusen had usually done at first, then the water would be blown away, and you would sink. But underwater, Sakusen could propel himself like a fish. It had become a control exercise in itself, and another game of sorts as well, to see how much chakra would be needed to blast one up to the pier's edge. Finding that amount was the problem, though. Water was harder to work with than trees, because it kept changing. Itachi glanced at Sakusen. He had his thinking face on again, and it was obvious that he was onto something because his food hung halfway out of his mouth. Sakusen had amazing zoning out powers. Too bad he would never get to use them while Itachi was around. Is the food bad? What's the problem? Snapping out of his thoughts, Sakusen quickly gulped his meat down. No, it's really good. Then hurry up and finish. Don't let your food get cold. And it's rude to zone out like that. That was harsh. Itachi was much too well-mannered to get anything at by him, and he thought Bawakabachan was bad. Pouting, Sakusen finished his bento quickly, diving for the taiyaki next. Uchiha Isen-san made the best taiyaki in Konoha, and the blonde-haired boy was a regular at the Uchiha bakery shop. They loved him and his service. Itachi cleared his throat, catching Sakusen's attention mid-chew. Tu-san said he'd going to take me to the battlefield soon. The war is nearly over, but he wants me to see what it's like. I'll be leaving tomorrow, so remember to buy your own lunch. Sorry, I won't be around to train with you. Sakusen almost dropped his taiyaki. What? He shouted. Itachi grimaced, holding his hand up to his ear. Sakusen was really loud when he wanted to be. Pa-san said it was an Uzumaki thing? Apparently, Kushinooba was worse. Sakusen was still reeling, waving his arms around. How come you get to see the fighting? I want to go, too. Can he take me with you? Please? Please? Itachi shook his head, watching the flailing taiyaki with a sharp eye. He would not be getting hit in the face with a hot pastry if it broke off. Tu-san says that this is a big exception he's making, just for me. He can't be responsible for someone else. Sakusen looked down, disappointed. His taiyaki was still miraculously intact. It made sense, though. If anything happened to Fugaka's son while he was out on the battlefield, there wouldn't be any big repercussions. Because Itachi was his son, only Mikoto would get angry. No one else would really care. On the other hand, if Fugaka brought someone else not related to him, especially someone that was under the Sandame's jurisdiction, well, he would have to take responsibility for any injuries that Sakusen sustained, as well as face the political consequences. Angering the Hokage was probably not a smart idea for any clan head. Still, Sakusen wanted to go. It wasn't fair that Itachi got all the fun, and besides, he was getting better with his sword, too. His form was pretty good, and he could cut through dummies all day. He scuffed his foot against the dirt sadly. Oh, Itachi knew that face. If Sakusen started thinking, then bad things would start to happen. Drastic measures needed to be taken, and now, whipping out another taiyaki from his bag, kept for emergencies like this, Itachi stuffed it in the other boy's mouth, earning himself a cry of protest. Cheer up. You'll get to see the war soon, too, you know. It's not like we're ever going to not see any fighting in our lifetimes, he said, putting more emphasis on the hour. The war was rumored to be ending soon, but it never really went away, if the history of the great nations said anything. No doubt there would be another war later. Sakusen wasn't listening. Itachi's taiyaki attack had been a little too late. Already, his mind was going a mile a minute. He didn't want to wait, not really. And if Sakusen wanted something, if he was determined enough, he usually got it. It was just a matter of how he was going to trail a squadron made up of arguably the most elite ninja in Konoha, including their clan head. Time to hit his library. That usually had all the answers he needed. And he still had a couple of days. Sakusen had time. Sitting in his chair at the Hokage's tower, Hiruzen watched his grandson through his crystal ball with a frown. He hadn't been the same after coming back that one lunchtime. More determined, more focused. He would have chalked it up to a fight with the Uchiha clan head's son, if not for the fact that the scrolls Sakusen was studying had more to do with the Uchiha clan and their Sharingan. Itachi had not awakened it yet, of that he knew. His grandson did have a certain thirst for knowledge. Maybe it was just that. Just like one of his students, in fact. A little disturbed at the parallels, Hiruzen took a puff of his pipe. Orochimaru was certainly nothing like Sakusen. Their upbringings were slightly similar, but Sakusen's parental figures still existed. Just weren't around. Kushina would be fighting close to the inner outpost soon, actually. Minato, from what he had heard, had needed time to recover after his now legendary massacre of the enemy forces and the death of his student. Hopefully when the war was over, everyone would be returning. Everyone left alive. That is, the Sandame's grip tightened on his pin. Uchiha Obito did not deserve to die. From what Hiruzen remembered, he was a kind and compassionate boy, loved by nearly all in Konoha. News of his death hadn't even been made public yet, since it was so recent. He was a future contender for the Hokage's seat, with all the love he held to his village. Sakusen would be greatly saddened when he found out. Returning his gaze to his grandson, Hiruzen was about to do his daily surveillance of the village when a Chunin barged into his room. He rubbed his head, waiting for the inevitable headache. He needed a break. Yes, that's what he would do. Take a well-deserved break from village work after the war. He was done with the deaths and fighting in war. A new Hokage would have to be appointed soon, anyway. Now, what was the issue this time? If it was the broken coffee machine again, Hiruzen would break his desk. The Sharingan is the Kekkei Jinkai of the Uchiha clan. It allows the user to see chakra and gives them an enhanced clarity of perception, allowing them to memorize and copy jutsu. Sakusen recited. He smirked. Well, that was great and all, but it wouldn't help them see him trailing them. Now, if it was something like the Hyuga's Byakugan, Sakusen would have been in trouble. Still, that was a useful tool to have. Itachi was lucky he had a Kekkei Jinkai. Although he hadn't awakened yet, it seemed. How did one awaken it? Shrugging his shoulders, Sakusen threw the scroll back on top of the stack he'd made and went down the hallway to his grandfather's study. He really didn't need to know how the Sharingan worked or how it got awakened. Anyways, he just wanted to make sure that the Uchiha clan didn't have some unorthodox means of checking to see if they were being trailed. He wasn't going to be following them from directly behind. Anyway, the last time he tried with Kakashi, he'd been caught every single time. No, he would have to stay much farther back. Sakusen frowned, pausing in his next step. He hadn't seen Rin, Obito, or Kakashi in a while, now that he thought about it. They were so mean, not coming back to visit him. Or even Shursui, for that matter. Shursui had been gone a while, after he'd been promoted to Chunin. Wasn't Shursui supposed to be stationed closer to the village? He forgot about everything once he got to his grandfather's war table. It was a map of the great nations on a large table, with pieces representing troops. Gigi kept an exact replica at the tower, and he constantly kept both updated, so he could plan at home and at work. There was even a schedule for the different squads that would be sent out, as well as other things, but Sakusen only really needed the schedule and the pieces. Thank goodness Bawako-Bachan or Gigi weren't home. They most certainly would not let him go with the Uchiha squad if he asked, and it wasn't fair if only Itachi got to go. Something in his head told him that this was a bad idea, but he kicked the voice to the side. He'd proved that he could do stuff just as well as Itachi too. Now, let's see. Where would Fugaka go? He could go through each list and see if Fugaka was on there, but there were at least 50 lists, with different pieces on the board for every squad. That was a lot of work to go through, and Sakusen hated working hard. He would be smart about this. If he was Fugaku, he certainly wouldn't want to send his kid far out into the front lines. That eliminated the pieces being sent into the top border, which also meant he could eliminate those going into other nations. No way would Itachi be in an invasion. That left defense. And he knew that Itachi would be leaving in a day now, meaning that he could take out lists that didn't schedule anything for tomorrow. His choices were whittled down by a lot now. He regretted not asking how long Itachi was going to be gone, because that would have narrowed his search down a little more based on the distance that he could travel in a day. But it was too late now. Itachi would get suspicious if he asked, and Sakusen, while he was a good liar, couldn't really keep anything from Itachi. Or Mikoto. Those two were scary smart. He gathered up all the lists of defending squadrons that fit his criteria and plopped down on a comfy chair. It was still a lot of names and patrols. This could take some time going through, and he didn't want cramps from bending over to read. He didn't see the malicious gleam in the eye holes of the snarling mask of his ANBU guard, hidden up in the ceiling vent. Half an hour later, Sakusen had his squad, the route they would take, and the time they would leave. If he wanted to, he could leave before they did to beat Itachi to the outpost, but Gigi or someone else would most likely notice and send Itachi's squad as a pursuit squad to bring him back. Besides, they were probably faster than he was. Going behind them was the best option. His only other problem was his tail. After using his rudimentary sensing skills, he'd been able to pinpoint where his guards were most of the time. He didn't feel anything before he started his search for the right squad, so they were probably outside. Unless they were suppressing. A cold chill ran through Sakusen, and he extended his senses. What if they had been suppressing? Then he would be caught by Gigi and wouldn't be able to go see the fights. Circulating his chakra, he pinged outwards, trying to find his guard. The sensing technique was something only a select few people could perform. It involved circulating the chakra throughout the body and expelling it in a small wave. Chakra reacted with chakra, and so foreign chakra signatures bounced the signal back, which the sensor could feel to get a grasp of the location and size of the chakra of the person, or something like that. The scroll that Sakusen had read was for experts, and while he hadn't necessarily understood everything in there, he'd gotten most of it. That was why suppressing your chakra made it impossible for sensors to sense you. In order to ping back, chakra needed to be moving, and suppression stilled the flow of chakra to make sure that no pings were sent back. Sakusen had tried the suppression technique once, but had failed miserably. He had too much of it to completely stop, which would be a problem on his secret mission, but he would make do somehow with simple stealth. Pinging outward, he breathed a sigh of relief when he felt a presence on the roof of the house. That was his guard. No one would actually enter the house of the Hokage, after all. He nearly laughed at his stupidity. What was he thinking about before this? Oh yes, his tail. That would be a problem, but maybe he would play sick that day. There was no need to guard someone that was staying in the most protected area in Konoha. First things first, though, was his equipment. There was a lot to do, and he had to pack quickly before anyone came home. The next morning, Bawako set a worried hand on top of Sakusen's head, frowning slightly at the temperature. Don't worry, Bawako-bachan. I'm fine. Just a little tired. Sakusen rasped out, bags underneath his eyes. He started coughing a little. Inside, she cackled. Did he actually think he could fake a condition to an experienced medical nin like herself? She dealt with Jiraiya on a monthly basis, and he was the absolute worst. No doubt that Sakusen was pretending the majority of it. Although he wasn't sick, he was certainly exhausted. His chakra was low, and he was tired. That much was obvious. That sensei of his certainly seemed to work him hard. It was a good thing that she was discharged yesterday back onto the active roster after his practice. Sakusen, while smart and determined, was still a child, and closer to a toddler at that. 4-year-olds shouldn't be getting up at 7 in the morning to train for 5 hours in Kenjutsu. He deserved a rest, she decided. But only this once. Next time, he wouldn't be getting away with it. No slacker would be raised in her household. Stay in bed for the rest of the day, she ordered with a stern look on her face. You're tired, so you need to regain your strength. I'll have someone leave lunch out on the front door later during the afternoon. Sakusen had already pulled the covers over his face, leaving his long blonde hair peeking out. She gave a little huff. The boy needed a haircut, but he insisted that he wanted to keep it long. Short hair didn't suit him, he said, and sadly, Bawako had to agree. Taking a last glance back at him, Bawako walked out of his room, closing the door behind her. He was an Uzumaki, and they healed fast. Next morning, He would be bouncing around everywhere swinging that new wakizashi of his. Sakusen would be fine. As soon as he heard the front door close and felt Bawako-Bachan's chakra drift away, Sakusen sat up. He grinned victoriously. He'd had to go through great lengths to be able to fool his grandmother. Staying up all night to look tired had been part of it, and before his grandmother had come in he'd spent the better part of an hour literally roasting his face off near the heater vents to make it seem like he had a fever. It seemed to have worked, but you could never really tell with Bachan. That's what made her really scary. Itachi would leave in an hour, so Sakusen would probably leave about 15 minutes after them. Far enough to stay undetected, since ninja moved fast, and close enough to still catch their trail. He shouldered his bag, snapping his weapons pouch to his leg and his wakizashi to his side. Fingering the hilt, he nearly sighed from the bliss of just holding his sword. His sleepless night had also consisted of tediously cleaning the sword and making sure the edge was keen and sharp. It was good to have your equipment in top condition during a fight. Extending his senses, he quickly pinpointed the locations of the ANBU guarding the Hokage residence. It would be relatively easy to get past the guards. If they stopped to question him, he'd just say that he was going out training. They wouldn't really force him to stay home. Hopefully they wouldn't alert Bachan. Strangely, when he stepped out, no one stopped him, even as he made a run to the gate. That was odd. He'd expected someone to ask, but maybe they didn't care. That worked better for him, in any case. Stopping by the local taiyaki vendor, Sakusen ate those religiously. He quickly bought a couple, nodding to the woman who baked them. Munchies were important, and he had to keep his energy up after pulling an all-nighter. He wasn't doing that anytime soon again. Sakusen actually had to force his eyelids open to stay awake. As he neared the gate, Sakusen slipped between two buildings across the road from the gatehouse. He neatly wrapped up his last taiyaki, making sure it was safely tucked away in his backpack. His outfit consisted of a black, zipped-up jacket over a dull green shirt and black pants. He'd seen an orange jumpsuit on sale at one of the stores that made him cringe. Who in the world would wear that? And why? Granted, it did draw less suspicion because of the fact that it was so conspicuous, but still, orange. He peeked his head out from the alleyway he was in. By now, Itachi would have left, which meant it was nearly time for Sakusen to leave, too. He pulled out his crinkled map, running through the route again. It was simple enough, and followed a road. Multiple roads, actually. He would probably stay in the trees to jump to avoid suspicion. Wow, Enma's training would actually come in handy, for once. Monkeys liked bananas, right? He'd get Enma some bananas later, as thanks. If he didn't toss him off another tree when he found out what Sakusen had done, that is, his stomach suddenly twisted uncomfortably. Was this a good decision? Gigi and Bawako-Bachan would be terribly worried, he knew. Maybe he should have left a note? The gate guards switched shifts, and Sakusen pushed all indecisiveness out of his mind. He'd prepared and planned too much to let it all go to waste. He was about to dash out from the buildings and out of the gates when a hand suddenly snagged the hood of his black jacket. Whipping around, his blood ran cold. Hiri-sensei. The first time she'd seen the kid that the Hokage was requesting her to teach, she immediately brushed him off. Too little, not strong enough, and too oblivious to the state Konoha was in. It was one thing to grow up in war, and an entirely different thing to experience it. That shine in the kid's eye spoke of stupidity and a sheltered lifestyle. What was the Sandaime thinking? If he wanted the boy to be safe, he had to let the kid know what kind of shitstorm he was dealing with first. This was not a child ready to go into battle lopping off heads. That's what they did. He was annoying, with all the crap he spouted day and night about how amazing his friends were in battle. Yeah, right, she snorted. You weren't friends with anyone until you'd spent a day bathing together in other people's blood. Or if you fucked the whole day. Anyone worked. He might think that he understood war. Might think that he knew what he was dealing with. But the truth was, you never really knew unless you experienced the fighting for yourself. But his determination had shown through, and, a little irritably, the boy had grown on her. Just a little. Like a mold. He had a passion for learning, and didn't give up easily. Hiyori had to appreciate that kind of grit, even in a stupid little brat. Most would just give in and start crying after the first ache started up. But this one was special. He had potential. That was also the reason why she had decided to do what she was doing now. Yesterday had been a wonderful day. Haori had beat the kid into the ground in the morning, got the casts off and the uniform back on in the afternoon, and had her first actual mission in a long time in the evening. Being able to stand and move freely after months of confinement was orgasmic. That mission, unfortunately, was more babysitting. And it was the same kid. She was starting to like the kid, true, but that didn't mean the Sandame had to take every chance to stick them together. Someday, she was going to park her foot up the ass of the Chunin that kept sticking her with babysitting Sakusen missions. But when the kid had gotten home, his face reminded her of someone out to kill. That sort of determination always interested her. When she clambered into the vents of the Hokage's residence to do some spying, those small vents were not made for people with hips like hers, she was disappointed to find that he was researching the Uchiha. Haori had expected a little more from her student. Not even a scroll on how to kill someone with your pinkies, but a scroll on the Uchiha. They were boring as fuck. Why the hell did he want to know about the Sharingan? What he did next really piqued her interest. He'd found, with impressive speed, the squad that Uchiha Fugaku was heading out on, and that jogged her memory to recall some of the gossip that she'd heard around the ANBU lounge. Fugaku is taking his son to see the war, someone had said. She'd smirked then, a slow, sadistic twist of the lips. So the boy wanted to experience war, did he? He was probably jealous of his friend. They hung out together frequently, so it made sense. She would judge him based on his effort to tag along, and would decide then. This time, she was not disappointed. He might have been a stupid little brat, but he was a smart, stupid little brat, if that made sense. Sakusen had drawn plan after plan, and his final one was a decent try, if she said so herself. Not bad, but not too good either. She expected much less, so she was pleasantly surprised at the amount of thought that a 4-year-old had put into escaping his village security. That all-nighter was something else too. Kudos to him. Presently, he was clutched in her arms against her chest almost protectively, still frozen up with fear. How cute. Now, Haori purred. Surely, you weren't thinking of escaping here to follow the Uchiha and go see the fights for yourself, were you? A fire suddenly lit in the boy's eyes, and she watched, amused, as he connected the last of the dots. You were the guard last night. I remember your chakra, but you were up on the roof. How did you know? She threw her head back and laughed. You haven't heard of shadow clones? I made one to act as me on the roof, then I suppressed my own and watched you. I must say, I'm impressed with you. You've done so well, she crooned, pinching his cheeks. He drew back, a stubborn pout on his lips. So you told the ANBU not to delay me this morning, either. Well, it doesn't matter. I'm still going, and you can't stop me. That was quite a leap of logic he made, but correct nonetheless. Except for his last bit. You're mistaken. I'm not going to stop you. I'm here to escort you. She watched as the confusion set on his face and smirked. You weren't thinking that I would let you go on this alone, would you? First, though, we should get our stories straight. You escaped out of the village, then I ran off in pursuit, but was too late. You already made it to the battlefield. And it's not like I'll get in trouble either. I'm not the assigned guard for you today, so I have no responsibility for you at all, she said in a sing-song tone. All right. Sakusen cheered, and she blinked a little at the complete 180 he'd just done. My, he was much too trusting. What if she was leading him into a trap? He still was a stupid little kid. After whispering her plan to him, she sauntered out from between the buildings to the gate guard's booth. They noticeably stiffened up at the sight of her. Gecko Haori was on par with Inuzuka Tsum in her sadistic tendencies, and it was common knowledge. So, boy, she said with a husky purr, drawing out the last word. How's your day been? Must be boring, with nothing exciting happening around here. She bent over the desk at the word exciting, leering at the petrified guards who were eyeing her now exposed ample cleavage. Sakusen wrinkled his nose. Sensei was so weird sometimes. Scratch that, all the time. But he had to admit, there was something hypnotizing of the view he was getting of her swaying behind. Shaking his head, he bolted through the gate while the guard's attention was diverted. That was easy. A minute later, he was joined by his sensei mid-tree jump. What did you do to them? He asked in a slightly disturbed tone. Images of torture filled his head, but to his surprise, Hori-sensei simply shook her head and winked cheekily at him. You'll understand when you're older. You know where to go, right? Oh yeah, his map. He brought it out from his pocket, tracing the trail. It says we follow this trail for a mile, then switch to the next. Then let's do that. Sakusen was quiet for a moment, before opening his mouth again. Hey sensei. Thanks for helping me sneak out. Hori laughed, this time without any humor. Don't thank me, kid. I'm doing this for you. But whatever you do, don't ever thank me for this. It's because I care for you now that I'm doing this. No doubt, you'll be traumatized. You'll hate me like the piece of shit I am for doing this to you. But I know this. If you can carry on, you will be stronger than you could ever dream. And that strength will keep you alive, at least for now. Stay alive. I don't need more deaths on my hands. That's it for today, guys. Hope you enjoyed this video. Thanks for watching.